Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Northeast Georgia Real Estate Podcast. I always love these, getting the opportunity to sit down with unique individuals in different aspects of not only business, real estate, nonprofits. I mean, we really kind of cover the whole gambit, but I got a very nice guest that I'm excited to bring to you guys today, Miss Ellen Bryson. She's the owner and founder of Bryson Trails Consulting. Is that right?
That's right.
Awesome. So Ellen, I know about you. Why don't you do me a favor and tell our audience a little bit more about kind of who you are and kind of how you got into doing what you're doing now?
Great. I actually spent 25 years in the telecom industry and spent the last 10 years in the industry in the C-suite. And really loved the telecom industry and actually did a startup in Nashville. And 4 years into that, I actually got recruited by another group of telecom carriers in Louisiana to go and do a similar thing. And had not moved yet, had not left Nashville, and 5 years into or not 5 years, 5 months into the plan, the largest investor in the group got bought out by another company.
Oh.
And that company was not interested in a startup venture and bowed out. And when they bowed out, the group kind of fell apart. So that left me kind of scrambling, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And Nashville was not a technology town. So I started trying to figure out, okay, I've kind of always wanted to have my own business. What are the things I really enjoy? And I'd always enjoyed business planning and strategy. And so I decided to start my own business. I actually licensed a process that focuses on execution called the CEO Advantage. And that's how I got started. And I've loved every minute of it since and found out that it really is my passion and brings me great joy and it doesn't feel like work.
Well, that's fantastic. There's a couple things in there that I just want to highlight that not a lot of people are able to say in the same sentence. Passion, I love it, and my own business.
Yes.
So that's fantastic. So tell me, how long have you been doing that here in the Athens market?
Okay, I moved to Athens in 2012, so I guess 11 years. And I don't do a lot of the CEO Advantage work here because it tends to be designed for mid-market companies. So what I've had to do is look for other ways to use those skill sets to help smaller businesses here in the area. So I've started a couple of CEO peer groups. I've started a manager peer group. I do some nonprofit work here. And I do have a few business clients here, but they tend to be smaller businesses and not mid-market.
Okay, so there's a couple things I want to unpack there. When you say mid-market, for anybody that's watching this that might not know what that means, what does that entail?
Typically, a mid-market company is a company that generates between $10 million and $250 million in revenue. So my sweet spot is probably companies that may be close to 10 and want to grow to 50. And so helping them make that transition, helping them figure out what they need to do in order to grow and get over those barriers that tend to derail companies in that process.
That's understandable. And to that point, most people might not know this, but what takes you from being a startup company to becoming a small market to becoming a mid-market company? There's usually some changes that have to take place. You're not going to normally be able to transition through each one of those phases doing the same exact stuff, right?
Right. That's actually an interesting question because there are some very specific barriers to growth that every organization will run up against in their development. And those things tend to be leadership, systems and structure, and then understanding which market dynamic is most important depending on where they are in their growth cycle. So those three things are things that become barriers at different points. There's usually a break point around 10 million, 50 million, 200 million, and a million. So getting over that first million is really very difficult. There are 28 million tax filing entities in the U.S., and 96% of those companies never get above $1 million in revenue.
Wow.
So those barriers are very predictable.
Interesting. And that's obviously where you come in to be able to evaluate where they're currently at and what they potentially would need to do to be able to get through that ceiling.
Correct.
Okay, awesome. Well, what are some of the different community involvements that you have either here in the Athens market or kind of locally, regionally, however you want to kind of tap into that?
Okay, I've served on a couple of nonprofit boards, but the thing I'm most involved in currently is the Classic City Rotary.
Okay.
I'm on that board. I've been a member since 2013. And the thing I really like about that is we do a lot of work with Our Daily Bread, with J.J. Harris Elementary School, with Books for Keeps. We have some environmental projects that we're focused on that involve composting, and we're trying to get involved in the solar aspects of Micah's Creek, the new development on the east side of Athens. And so I really enjoy that. And in 2016, I believe, another club member and I started the Vic Chestnut Songwriter of the Year Awards for musicians in the local Athens community. And we are entering our 8th year with that award, and that's been really fun. And 2022, our winner actually went on to get a record deal and released their first album last fall through Strolling Bones Records.
Oh, how cool.
So yeah, it is. It's been nice to see that that award has actually benefited some of the recipients. It comes with a cash prize, it comes with a PR package, and so it's a pretty big deal.
So it sounds like you got a pretty long background of like trying to be involved and trying to help others, and I mean I think that kind of shines through with everything you just kind of mentioned.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's awesome. So what do you feel that some of your biggest successes have been, maybe not necessarily in your previous career, but now in your current consulting company that you're using now?
Okay. Two that come to mind. I helped two really small businesses that were about $6 million in revenue when I started working with them. I helped them grow their businesses to solid mid-market companies, from lifestyle businesses to mid-market, and then both of them were able to sell those businesses and actually did very well. And those are probably some of the things that I'm most proud of, because it actually was the whole process. It was like one of the companies had almost gone bankrupt before the first year we engaged. And so seeing them, they grew their company to $23 million in 2.5 years. And they actually walked away with $23 million in cash for their business.
Oh, good for them.
So that was a very exciting opportunity.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So what would you say sets your business or what it is that you do apart from maybe other individuals or other businesses or organizations that are similar to yours?
Okay. I think the thing that sets me apart is that my relationships tend to be long-term in nature. And because I go in as a trusted advisor and actually become like an ad hoc member of their leadership team, I'm able to say things as part of the team that a team member would not be able to say. So I feel like that is something that really sets me apart, and that actually gives me like a unique value proposition, because they're getting the expertise without hiring another person. And because I stay engaged long term and meet with them on a regular basis, it allows me to really understand their business, to get to know their staff, and to really see the things that, if they do a little bit differently, can actually help them grow.
So really it allows you to be kind of a third-party, unbiased advisor that's not a yes man.
Yes, exactly.
So because I think that's important. I think a lot of organizations, they do get people that just do kind of unfortunately fall in line, and they don't want to rock the boat, even though they might have an idea that they feel could be implemented and change the direction of the company for the best.
Right.
So I think where you're coming in from that consulting standpoint it solves exactly that problem.
Yes.
And you had mentioned for a long time period, as far as like how long you're engaged with the company. For individuals that might not know, or maybe they're in the position of wanting to bring in a consultant to help them get to that next level, what's a realistic time period? And it might differ. Feel free to add into that based off the company or not. But like, how long would you say that your life cycle with a client is?
Okay, that's a really good question, and it is dependent on the company,
Mm-hmm.
and it's dependent a lot on the strength of the leadership team. Like the organization that I mentioned, I helped take from 6 million to 23 million. They had a really strong leadership team, and they were able to do that growth in 2.5 years.
Oh, wow.
The other organization that I mentioned to you that grew to 45 million, they grew pretty rapidly for the first 5 years, but then they started to have some struggles. And so I would say, well, that engagement was an 8-year engagement.
Okay.
So, it just depends on a lot of things, but I would say the biggest determinant of that is really the leadership team and the ability that the team has to execute. It's all about execution.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter necessarily how great your plan is. Whatever the plan is, though, you have to be able to execute.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the sayings that I kind of always joke about is like, you have to have the right butts in the right seats. Otherwise, it doesn't
Yes.
matter what you do. Like, they won't be able to do what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Right. And, you say the right butts in the right seats. And really, that's the only competitive advantage that companies have anymore, because everybody has access to technology.
Mm-hmm.
People can't really differentiate themselves too much in technology anymore. So it really is important to find the right people and get them in the right seats.
I completely agree with that. So what would you say that you have to do, maybe not only in your own business, but also when you're advising clients for adapting and changing markets?
You need data, you need research, you need to listen to what the data tells you, and then you need to have a plan and you need to work your plan. You really need to focus on execution. I can't say that enough. And the other thing is really, people tend to want to take on a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but realistically, as humans, we can only really do 3 to 5 things well at any given point in time. So it's really important to narrow your focus. And if you can narrow your focus and work your plan, you're going to be so much more successful than if you have a grand and glorious plan that scatters you all over the place.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that. So you had mentioned that you have to be able to work your plan. So what would be a realistic expectation for anybody watching or listening to this saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. How often do I need to go back and check what it is that I'm doing if it's working? Like, when do I have enough data? Is it 60 days? Is it 90 days? Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? What does that look like?
Well, I think it depends on how frequently you're looking at data, because typically with data, it takes 6 data points to see a trend.
Okay.
So if you're looking at data every 6 months, it's going to take a really long time to see a trend. If you're looking at it weekly, you'll see the trend a lot sooner. So it's important, I think, the frequency of which you look at the data.
Okay.
That's extremely important.
And we had previously talked about an EOS, or an operating system for any kind of businesses that run. And one of those that we had talked about in a previous meeting and conversation that we had were a lot of organizations, they focus on lag measures, so revenue. But like one of the main twists or caveats, if you will, that maybe is like the light bulb moment for some organizations,
Yes.
is when individuals like you come in and they start talking about, well, you need to focus on your lead measures. Like what are the actions that create the result that you're wanting to change?
Yes.
Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yes, it's really important to understand what the drivers are. Like revenue and gross profit and net profit are all lag measures. They're historical. And by the time you actually get that data, you can't impact that data. Mm-hmm. You can't do anything to change it because it's now history. Mm-hmm. So lead measures are actually measures that you identify that can help you actually change or impact that data while you still have time. Like if 2 weeks into a month, you notice that your lead measures are not generating the lag measure that you're trying to target, you can tweak the activities that you're doing so that that measure is actually going to actually deliver the result that you're looking for. But it's important to have enough data to be able to see this is or isn't working, and if it isn't working, what things do we need to do differently to get that result that we're targeting.
And I think that's perfect. And the reason that I brought that up, I know just from my own experience with being in real estate, a lot of new agents that we train, they're like, man, I was working and doing this one activity and I did it for so long and I didn't get any results, and then I just stopped doing it. And I'm like, okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. Like, let's talk about how long you were doing said activity. What was the result of the activity? And how many times did you actually perform whatever the activity was? So now we actually have that data that you were talking about. And it's like, if you only did said activity 2 times and expected a result, well, now we need to manage your expectations on the amount of work that's required to get the result that you want.
Right.
So I'm sure that on a much larger scale, very similar to just about any business operation, when it comes to, what your sales and marketing look like, and then how does that affect top line revenue and things like that. Would you agree?
Yes, I do agree. And I want to go back and I want to speak to something I think you asked me that I didn't answer.
Okay.
And I think it got to frequency of looking at things, and not just measures, but strategy should not be static. And part of what I do in my process with clients is make sure that every 90 days we're looking at where you want to be in 1 year and 3 years. And if the market has changed, the strategy needs to change.
Gotcha.
Things don't need to be stagnant, and you don't need to keep moving toward a target if the target has changed. Mm-hmm. You need to tweak and reassess and create a new plan.
I like that a lot. There's so many people that just get kind of stuck in their same ways. This is how we've always done it.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, just like what we talked about earlier, how you've hit this goalpost of a growth goal.
Yes.
And now it's like, well, this is how we've always done it, but that's not going to get you to the next playing field.
I want to add to that, because typically in a phase, what is the solution on the front end of a phase actually becomes the problem on the back end of the phase.
Interesting.
And that's why you can't get over the barrier to the next level, because you have to have different leadership skills, you have to have different knowledge, you have to have different process and procedure, and you have to have different systems. Things can't stay stagnant. As an organization grows, all of those things have to grow with it, because you're trying to manage people. Mm-hmm. And people add complexity, and systems add complexity, and processes add complexity. So it's very important that as an organization grows, that they have to continuously learn and grow as individuals, or it all falls apart.
I could just talk about this stuff all day. So what advice would you give to any potential aspiring entrepreneurs or business owners that are out there, maybe not necessarily trying to get into the exact field that you or I are in, but just kind of any generic kind of business knowledge that you could potentially give them?
Well, the one thing I've learned in my consulting, because I'm not industry specific, all businesses are basically the same. All businesses struggle with the same issues. They struggle with people, they struggle with process, they struggle with systems, they struggle with a lack of data. Pretty much business is business, and we try to overcomplicate it. Mm-hmm. What I tell my clients is, I'm the process expert, they're the industry expert. And if we work together, process and industry, they'll be fine. But they say to me, well, you don't know my industry. Well, I don't have to know your industry. You know your industry.
You know business.
And I know business. So it makes a great partnership. And I forgot where I was going with that. Remind me of that question you just asked me.
General business advice.
Business.
Yeah.
Okay. The most important thing, I think, is to have a plan and to work your plan. And the plan not only needs to be like your goals and objectives, but it needs to have a financial piece. It needs to have like a forecast, and you need to have good hiring practices and a good resource plan. It's like, when do I need to hire that next person? What's the trigger? And because your people, your finances, and your strategy all have to be aligned. If you don't have those three things, you're going to have a two-legged stool and you're going to fall over. You need all three.
And with that, there's a common saying that goes around, and people may have heard it, but they probably don't implement it as often as they should. Be slow to hire and quick to fire.
Absolutely.
Just because you put somebody in the wrong seat, it costs time and money and potential opportunity for getting them out the door, especially if you lag on the back end on removing them from said position.
And the thing is, if you put somebody in a position that they're not suited for, you're not doing them any favors either. It's hurting them, it's hurting their careers. They're not happy, you're not happy. But people tend to be quick to hire because they need a body, and they tend to be slow to fire because they're worried that they won't have anybody to do the work. Mm-hmm. But chances are the work's not getting done anyway because the person's not the right person for the job.
Yeah. And one of the other common things on that specific topic is any individuals in the very beginning of their entrepreneurship, of like growing their organization or their business, I've heard so many challenges or struggles of, I don't want to hire somebody because they're not going to be able to do the job as well as I can. And so they have their hands kind of in everything, just doing everything with regards to their company. But I found something profound where it was like, even if you hire somebody that's capable of doing your job at a 70% capacity, and they take that workload off of you, and now you're able to dedicate something to a more money-generating activity within your organization. And then if you hire a second person that's only able to do a 70% capacity, now you have somebody that's doing 140% of the work that you previously were doing. And more than likely, they're probably going to be better at it than you were originally.
And that's true. And actually, that is one of the first barriers that companies have to get over. Mm-hmm. The person who founds the company has to at some point either acknowledge that they are not the right person to move the organization forward, and they have to focus on what it is that got them into the business to begin with, or do they move into that CEO role and manage the day-to-day operations? It's really hard for people to make that transition.
Oh, I can imagine.
But it's exactly what you said. They can't continue to do everything. They either have to become the CEO and manage the business, or they have to focus on what they love, whether it's sales or engineering or whatever it is that brought them to the business, mm-hmm. and hire other people to support them in that management.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic kind of eye-opening opportunity, because that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
And the other thing too, a lot of people that you hire in that first phase of business are not necessarily going to be the people that can take you to that second level, mm-hmm. that can take you over $1 million. Because a lot of times in that startup phase, you're just looking for people who can get the work done. Mm-hmm. And people who can get the work done may be technically competent, but they may not have the managerial and leadership skills that you need them to have as you build a staff and try to grow your organization and move it forward.
Well, all the more reason that you need to potentially get involved, right?
Right.
So as we close out, I did want to highlight something that we had touched on briefly a second ago, and this is going to be more of a focus on what you're potentially looking for. I know that you brought up some of your peer groups that you have, the CEO Advantage. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, and potentially any businesses that are out there that might see this and be like, man, I really need that in my organization, or to be a part of that so that way I can grow my organization?
Okay, so They're really two things.
Okay.
My CEO peer groups are very different than the work I do with the CEO Advantage. If you're really interested in growing your organization and growing your leadership team, I really encourage you to get involved with a trusted advisor that will meet with you quarterly, and maybe one day a week, one day a quarter, and then 2 days annually, to really help you develop a plan that can be executed, and stick to that quarterly rhythm, because quarterly rhythms are what actually help organizations grow faster than anything else.
Okay.
It's about having that time set aside 1 day a quarter where you're going to work on the business and not in the business. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I do with the CEO peer groups is really about helping them develop their leadership skills, helping them understand more about organizational health and some of the things that have to do with accountability and motivation and communication and developing their people, so that they're doing those things that focus more on the softer side of business. And I found that that is very, that's a good way to use a peer group, because those tend to be common things that every business is experiencing. Yeah. And those types of things don't tend to be things that might be competitively sensitive or things that people don't want to share.
And one of the things that we briefly touched on before the podcast today was when we had our other conversation. Those peer groups are fantastic because they allow individuals that are in similar seats in different organizations to be able to really have that unbiased opinion from somebody else that might have already had that same problem. Right. And they found a solution to it, and it's like, oh, you're stuck on that. Here, let me help you with that. This is what I found that worked. Because when you're in those situations, you can't necessarily complain down the chain of command, right, because it looks like you don't know what you're doing. Right. And you can't complain up because, once again, it also makes you look like you don't know what you're doing.
Right. That's perfect. And I do want to speak to that. Having a peer group gives you an opportunity to really have almost like a board. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you have a group of people that you really get to know, that really get to know you, that you trust, that you can confide in, that you can show your warts to, and that are not going to judge you. And everybody tends to, like I said earlier, have the same types of problems. So you have an opportunity to have other people share their wisdom and experience, so you don't have to repeat the same mistakes. Yeah. And I think peer groups are just tremendously valuable. My peer groups tend to be made up of people from non-competitive industries, mm-hmm, but I think having peer groups within industries is also very helpful, because you also share common, as long as you're not competing head-to-head with one another, there's lots that you can learn from your peers in your industry as well. Mm-hmm.
Well, I love it. If anybody does or is interested in reaching out to you to maybe talk about bringing you in and having a consultation with you about anything that's going on within their business or organization, how would anybody go about finding you?
You can find me, Ellen, at brysontrails.com, or you can go to my website, brysontrails.com, and there's contact info on the website.
Okay, awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I love having you on. We could sit here and do this for hours.
I loved it. It was a lot of fun.
So, guys, thank you very much. Please reach out to Ellen if you do have any questions, if you are interested in maybe bringing in that trusted advisor to see where you're at to get you to that next level within your business. And as always, stay tuned to the next episode of the Northeast Georgia Real Estate Podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.